Members, when we rose, we had just completed the Public Finance Management Amendment Act. Or was it in, sir? Yes. Minister of Finance?
We present for the first reading a bill shortly entitled International Business Companies Amendment.
International Business Companies Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through the remaining stages at this sitting.
Members, the question is that Standing Order 48 to be suspended to allow the member to proceed with the bill for all three stages. Now for the question, as many as without opinion say aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no. And the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the International Business Companies Amendment Bill is one of a number of pieces of legislation we have to pass for St. Lucia to conform to international financial regulations, including the regulations as determined by the OECD and other such bodies, Mr. Speaker. This amendment, Mr. Speaker, arises from the fact that St. Lucia is a member of the Inclusive Framework on Base Erosion Profit Sharing, BEPS project, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, base erosion occurs when multinational enterprises take advantage of tax loopholes in one country to reduce their tax burdens in another. And these amendments or laws are normally enacted to stop that kind of tax avoidance as seen by the OECD, Mr. Speaker. Basically, that amendment seeks to do to amend a few sections in the law, Mr. Speaker, in the bill, and I'm going to go through these amendments. Mr. Speaker, there's an amendment to Clause 4, and Clause 4, Mr. Speaker, amends the Act to insert a new Part 1A, monitoring of compliance, to identify the functions of the minister and to permit the minister to delegate these functions. The bill also amends the Act to allow the minister to serve notice on an international business company or its registered agent to provide information to ensure compliance with the Act. The bill further amends the Act to allow an authorized officer on receipt of a warrant to enter the premises of a registered agent to assess whether the information kept and produced by a registered agent on the international business company to the minister satisfies the requirement of the Act, Mr. Speaker. Basically, Mr. Speaker, to ensure compliance, that, as I said before, that there is no tax avoidance, Mr. Speaker. Section 5A, Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 of the bill amends Section 5A by deleting the reference to the competent authority and replacing with a reference to the minister, Mr. Speaker. Section 6.7, Mr. Speaker, Clause 6 of the bill amends Section 67 by deleting the words competent authority and replacing the word minister. Mr. Speaker, these amendments seek to make St. Lucia compliant with the OECD and compliant with the framework on base erosion profit sharing, and to have a largely compliant rating with the OECD for exchange of information. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a series of laws which we are called to pass all the time, amendments which we are called to pass all the time, and that amendment came after discussions with the key stakeholders, and the key stakeholders meaning the people involved in St. Lucia in the business of IBCs, Mr. Speaker. So they are in concurrence with that amendment, and it's another step in St. Lucia avoiding any sort of blacklisting or anything of this nature, because anything of this nature will create chaos for St. Lucia's financial infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. So I urge members to support this amendment to the International Business Companies Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that the International Business Companies Amendment Bill be read a second time. Finance Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You have any closing remarks if you want to?
No, Mr. I move we have a full time.
I now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the International Business Companies Act, Cap 12.14.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Insertion of a new Part 1A.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Amendment of Section 5A.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Amendment of Section 67.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the International Business Companies Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Minister of Finance?
Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be passed a third time. They be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the International Business Companies Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the International Business Companies Amendment Act 2022.
Minister for Finance.
Speaker, I beg to move for first reading a bill shortly entitled Insurance Amendment.
Insurance Amendment.
Finance, please.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through all its stages in this sitting of the Honorable House.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Minister of Finance to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the bill is to amend the Insurance Act, Mr. Speaker, to grant the Register of Insurance or the Financial Services Regulatory Authority to grant an extension of the time specified in Section 26 and Section 57 of the Act for the submission of documents set out in these sections, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the documents that we speak of includes a balance sheet showing the financial position of the insurance business at the close of the year, a profit and loss account in respect of all insurance businesses. Basically, Mr. Speaker, is the financial statements of the insurance company, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the amendment to Section 57 seeks to grant a two-month extension is not sufficient to allow for the submission of these documents, Mr. Speaker. So we are amending Section 57, and it says, Mr. Speaker, to remove the reference to the registrar, allow an extension of time not exceeding 2 months, within which a registered association is required to submit the documents specified under Section 57. So, Mr. Speaker, it allows more time beyond the 2 months for an insurance company to provide the registrar or the FSRA with these documents, Mr. Speaker. Clause 5, Mr. Speaker, the bill amends the Act by introducing a new section, 57A, to allow a registered association an extension of time to submit the documents specified under Section 57 of the Act for a period permitted by the registrar in the case of a state of emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, what that amendment is saying is that it allows insurance companies more time to furnish these documents, the documents with the registrar of insurances, Mr. Speaker. And the amendment to Section 57, Mr. Speaker, it says the register makes 57A. The registrar may extend the period for a registered association to submit documents specified under Section 57 for a period of 2 months, or such further notice, or such further period which he or she considers reasonable under the following circumstances: that the Governor General, by proclamation under Section 17 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, declares the state of emergency exists, or the Minister responsible for disaster management declares that a disaster exists under Section 18 of the Disaster Management Act, Mr. Speaker. So what it does is, if there is a disaster, say emergency, the insurance company has more time to lodge the documents with the register, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, talking about insurance companies, Mr. Speaker, I really want to urge people to ensure that they insure their houses, Mr. Speaker, because it's important now that people insure their houses because of the changes in climate change, etc., and that the value of the insurance is up, is similar, or the value of the insurance they take, Mr. Speaker, is in line with the value of their house. Because many times you find people are underinsured, and when the time comes, they do not get the return if something happens, Mr. Speaker. And also, I want to urge people also to read carefully the terms and conditions of the insurance policies. Read carefully, because there are several circumstances where people believe that they are insured for certain things, and when claims are made, the insurance company finds a reason why they should not, I mean, the insurance company finds a way, Mr. Speaker, finds some clause why they should not pay, Mr. Speaker. And there's too many times, Mr. Speaker, too many times. And there are some insurance companies who are known for that, Mr. Speaker, and some types of insurances that people insure and they pay their premiums and they expect when something happens that they get compensated. When the time comes, the insurance company finds all reasons why they should not pay, Mr. Speaker. So it's two things. First of all, when you buy an insurance policy, you should always find the details. Make sure that you get the details of the policy. Ask all the questions, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, when insurance companies do not fulfill the obligations of their insurance contracts, there ought to be a way, there ought to be a way where they are brought to speed for that sort of non-compliance, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know that you are a man, the insurance business is very close to your heart, and you always, and you are possibly the longest serving boss of insurance, longer than me in this parliament. So I want you, Mr. Speaker, to use your good offices to educate the populace that insurance companies do not take unsuspecting citizens for a ride. I think, Mr. Speaker, that we have to cause that, because too many complaints, Mr. Speaker, particularly certain types of insurances, where people believe that they're covered and they are not covered, Mr. Speaker. And you make a plan and your plan doesn't work. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that this amendment be accepted, but I also hope that insurance companies can see that the government is making compliance a little easier for them because of circumstances. But I also hope that they meet their obligations to their policyholders, and many times that does not happen. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that the insurance amendment bill be read a second time. The member for Susan Saltibus.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have an issue with the passing of this bill, but just seeking clarification. But before that, Mr. Speaker, just to, on a lighter side, maybe there's a conflict and the Deputy Speaker should sit in the chair. But Mr. Speaker, regarding 57A, which speaks for a period of 2 months or such further period which he or she considers reasonable, I just want to confirm that it is only the two other subsections, A and B, that is these other circumstances and not anything. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Minister for Finance.
I think the honourable member got clarification. So in state of emergency, either declared by the Governor General or by the Minister responsible for disaster management.
Okay. Honourable members, the question is that the insurance amendment bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Insurance Act, Cap 12.08.
Mr. Speaker,
Clause 2.
Station.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 26.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 57.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Insertion of new Section 57A.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Insurance Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Honorable Finance Minister.
Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Insurance Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Insurance Amendment Act 2022.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment.
Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment.
Finance Minister.
I beg to move suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through all its stages at this sitting of the Honorable House.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Minister of Finance to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill for consideration of the Honorable House is the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority is the body established under Section 3 of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Act, Cap 12.23, to regulate and supervise the international financial services sector and the non-bank financial institutions in St. Lucia, like insurance companies, etc., Mr. Speaker. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Act, the original act, to include the function of registration of pension fund plans as a function of power that can be delegated to the executive director or the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. So that means that the FSRE can not only regulate, they can regulate pension funds, Mr. Speaker. The amendments also grants the Financial Services Regulatory Authority the power to appoint a person to assume control of a regulated entity with the powers of receiver manager under the Companies Act. So if the FSRE finds that a company is in problems or in jeopardy or is not doing what it ought to do or will jeopardize the shareholders or the people who are holding the policies, Mr. Speaker, they can appoint a receiver manager. They can give them the additional option to appoint a receiver manager, Mr. Speaker. And the amendment also grants the Financial Services Regulatory Authority the power to execute a memorandum of understanding with a competent authority as defined by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. So they can delegate that authority to a competent authority, a body or a person that is considered a competent authority by the Financial Action Task Force, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the amendments are as follows. Clause 3 of the bill amends Section 30 of the Act, power to delegate functions or powers, to include the registration of a pension fund plan as a function which the Financial Services Regulatory Authority is authorized to delegate to the executive director of the authority. As a result of this amendment, Section 32C of the Act is deleted. Clause 4 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 37 of the Act, authorities, powers, and measures for preventing adverse consequences, to allow the authority to appoint a person to assume control of a regulated entity's affairs where the authority considers that the regulated entity is engaging in unsafe or unsound business practices or violates any law. Clause 4 of the bill also amends Section 37 of the Act to allow the person appointed to have all the powers of a receiver or receiver manager, and requires that person to submit a report of the regulated entity's affairs, including recommendations to the authority, within 3 months of the date of the person's appointment or the extension of the person's appointment. Clause 4 of the bill further amends Section 37 of the Act to empower the authority to take certain actions on receipt of the report. Clause 5 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 38 of the Act, exchange of information, to include a competent authority as one of the entities which the authority may enter into a memorandum of understanding for the purpose of the exchange of information. So, Mr. Speaker, again, another law that will strengthen the financial infrastructure of our country, Mr. Speaker, and make it compliant with best practice.
Honourable members, the question is that the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. Ayes have it.
An act to amend the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Act, Cap 12.23.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 30.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 37.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 5.
Amendment of Section 38.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 6. Clause 1, sorry.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, the question is that I beg to report that the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment Act 2022.
Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Land and House Tax Amendment Act.
Land and House Tax Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages during this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Finance Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. And now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for second reading a bill shortly entitled Land and House Tax Amendment Act. Mr. Speaker, this is an amendment to the Land and House Tax Act, Cap 15 and 13, Mr. Speaker. It basically is to do two things. It is to continue a practice started in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, which excluded house tax for residential properties, Mr. Speaker. And what we're doing is that we are extending it for the year 2022, so there'll be no house tax on residential properties for the year 2022. So that means for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, Mr. Speaker, there'll be no tax on house tax on residential properties, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, it serves two purposes. One, was an election promise that we would eliminate house taxes, residential property taxes, Mr. Speaker, and we are continuing that. But most importantly, we're going to conduct a thorough review of the tax regime in St. Lucia, a thorough review, both the property tax and the income tax and the company tax. We have to conduct a thorough review. So that gives us some time, whereas we can continue the practice of no property tax for residential properties and give us time to have a complete review. So we've met our manifesto promise, but we are also going to promise the taxpayers in this country that there's going to be a review of the entire income tax and the entire tax infrastructure in the country. I beg members to approve that amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. Member for Suzel Saltibus.
Mr. Speaker, obviously it's a bill that I think we will support on this side, having, as the Prime Minister said, something that was initiated under our watch. But Mr. Speaker, is just one observation, and that is the promise that the current government made to the people was that they would cancel the property tax on residential properties. But I think the Prime Minister, while he gave an explanation that it is maybe you need for 2022 because he wants to have a review, I think it is not what's going to be interpreted by the people when you said you were going to cancel it. Everybody would think it in perpetuity. But just some advice, if it will be accepted, Mr. Speaker. Particularly, we know of the difficult financial situation that exists. And Mr. Speaker, you know, and I guess some people might say, well, why didn't you? But you know, Mr. Speaker, you think of things as you go along. But Mr. Speaker, there are several people who owe property tax a lot of money. Okay, I'm not sure if the Prime Minister has the current outstanding figure owed on property tax on residential properties, Mr. Speaker. But what irks, Mr. Speaker, is that a lot of these people can't pay property tax, Mr. Speaker. A lot of these people who owe property tax. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would think maybe it might be a more effective way to get some money into the Treasury is that they should not apply to people who have outstanding taxes, Mr. Speaker. So it's a sort of encouragement to get people to come and pay the back date before 2017, okay, and then they can qualify. But it's just something that, you know, I think when we're looking at some of these things, we don't just throw the baby in the bathwater, as they say. So I think it's something that we, you know, need to be looked at carefully when we continue to give that. We do it in a very under a lot of scrutiny, Mr. Speaker, that we're not just everybody's benefiting from the people we really meant to target, Mr. Speaker. But I support this fully, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Mico South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I get to the bill, I certainly would like to appeal to you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the staff and the Parliament always do a very, very good job, but again, I've searched high and low for the amended version of the bill that we discussed this morning, and I have not found it. So I think that in the future, like the member from Beaufort South indicated, I think it would be good if in fact we're going to be amending something and we're only going to receive it on the date, that an extra effort is made to make sure that all members have gotten it, because that certainly would have been very useful. I also, Mr. Speaker, before I speak to the motion, I want to congratulate Julian Alfred. Julian Alfred is a really amazing athlete. Actually, he's from your constituency, member from Cassidy South. And this young lady who I continue to be very impressed with, and I think we all in St. Lucia should be very impressed with, that she has now been breaking all the records in the U.S. in the 60 meters. You know, I think that she was probably very grateful that the Olympics got delayed because she ended up getting an injury beforehand. But again, I just want to continue to encourage all our athletes who are participating in women's cricket and who also are under 19 team members who have also been participating. I think very appropriate to really congratulate them and to keep waving the flag for St. Lucia. And I'm very, very appreciative. Mr. Speaker, you know, property tax has been a very vexing issue in St. Lucia for a very long time. And certainly from my own perspective, the difficulties we've had with property tax has really been on how we are going to evaluate the tax. And sadly, we've had the practice in St. Lucia of evaluating property tax on the basis of the value of the property. And many of us will know the experiences that people have, that certainly you can go to an appraiser when you're borrowing money and he praises the value of the land and the house very high, and then when it comes to paying property tax, the same appraiser might find reasons to give you a lower appraisement. And a reason for a lot of persons not paying their taxes because the complication in really understanding what is owed. And certainly my administration was attempting to rationalize that by creating what we call an absolute tax. So in essence, zoning the country, Mr. Speaker, and depending on the level of facilities that existed in your community, based on the size of your lot and the value of your land, that an absolute fee would be made. I mean, just to give you a number, Mr. Speaker, there's approximately 66,000 households in St. Lucia. And if you assume 30% of those households are below the poverty line, there's approximately 40,000 households that should be making some kind of contribution to the property tax. And if you just simply took that at $500 on average, meaning that some people would pay more and some people would pay less, we're talking about $20 million. So I also found it very interesting, Mr. Speaker, that in the manifesto of the Labour Party, it's very, very clear. In fact, it was such an important issue, it's the #1 thing, page 24. It's the #1 point where it says that very categorically, remove the current property tax on residential buildings. The Minister of Finance is absolutely correct that we had made a similar promise. In fact, we promised that we would do it for 3 years, but because of COVID, we felt the need to extend the property tax, and also we were hoping to introduce a new tax. I continuously hear in this House conflicting messages, Mr. Speaker. So today I heard the Minister of Finance speaking about payables of $150 million. Well, you know, that amount was mentioned multiple times in this House. In fact, when we talked about financing the deficit that happened because of COVID, I mean, you're talking about your revenues dropped from approximately $100, $105 million a month to as low as $45 million. But on average, $55 million in the first year. I believe that last year we did somewhere closer to $65 million, and I'm hoping that those numbers are going up. And we said that the deficit was funded by the $320 million that was borrowed from the international institutions. I never said that? So if I show it to you, it's not a problem. Okay. So $300 million of the deficit was funded by the monies that we got from the international institutions. CDB, IMF, and World Bank. I'll be very happy to make Hansard a report available to you. So I also said that we extended the overdraft facilities the government had. So overdraft facilities were extended with the local banks, and also the overdraft facilities were extended by the ECCB, not only for St. Lucia, but for all of the country islands. And that the remaining part came from payables. And that our payables went from $30 million on average to as high as $150 million. If I'm not mistaken, it made it as high as $170 million. Now, I'm saying this because 3 months before the election, we actually had a budget. And all of those details were actually in the budget. And those details were actually in all the remarks and in my rebuttal, everything was provided. And yet still, the new administration in opposition promised the people they're going to give them the property tax exemption period. And again, I have to say to St. Lucians, there's a phrase I believe that the Labour Party uses is, my brother, watch your bread. I want to say to St. Lucians, you need to watch your bread. Because I believe, Mr. Speaker, there are many more things that to come. There are many more things to come, Mr. Speaker, where we would have found that the government would have made similar promises in other areas. And I believe it's going to be questionable in whether they can deliver those things. I am sympathetic to them, but to continue to convey to the people of St. Lucia that you did not know. Okay, bananas in France. You know, that's one of the oldest things. So you're telling me, so Mr. Speaker, you're telling me that a government had the ambition of being able to market bananas to France, made every attempt to do that. And because of circumstances beyond our control, it did not happen. But Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about in the manifesto. It says, remove the current property tax on residential residential buildings. It's clear and categorical. So, Mr. Speaker, so all I'm saying to you is that, again, like my member from Choiseul, I absolutely support this. I think that the economy has not recovered enough. I believe that people on household income is still down to the extent that we should do this. I want to applaud the government now for at least the minister coming out truthfully and saying that his position on removing property tax is going to be revised. And so therefore, I think that there are many other things which are included in this manifesto. Sorry, Mr. Speaker? He didn't say what? That he was revising. He said it's under review. Mr. Speaker, the member of finance just said that he is going to take time during this year to review the property tax along with income tax and corporate tax. I believe that that's what he said, but certainly Mr. Speaker, review means that there's a possibility you'll stop it. If not, okay. So, Mr. Speaker, if members on the opposite side now are insisting that they're not going to stop it, then why go through the facade of not making the change right now? Okay? Mr. Speaker, okay? So I'm just saying to you, I've given you the out. The member said that he's under review. Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries East said it is under review. Okay, this was a campaign promise. I'm happy if he's going to say that there's consideration of not doing it. Members on the opposite side said I'm misquoting them, and that in fact they're not saying that they're going to proceed. Is that what you're saying? So I'm saying if you're going to proceed, then proceed. But if you're not going to proceed, I think that when we talk about keeping yourself accountable and responding to the people's needs, there's a plan. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to sit down and explain bananas to France. Wait, say it now? So every attempt was sent to bananas to France. In fact, the meetings, Mr. Speaker, through you.
Remember, do not be derailed. Member of Microsoft, do not be derailed by the taunts. Proceed with the bill.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I no longer consider them taunts. I've now learned that when persons say things, because you know there's a very interesting story, Mr. Speaker. And it was a gentleman who was taken to court for defamation. And the judge listened to the arguments, and the gentleman who made the allegations against the other person could not see anything wrong in what he was saying. So the judge said to him, I want you to go home and write down on a piece of paper all the things that you said about that individual. So the next day, the gentleman came back to see the judge. The judge says, now I want you to take that piece of paper and tear it up into small pieces. And I want you to throw it outside the window of your car when you're driving home. So he did that. The following time they came to court, the judge said to him, okay, I would like you to go and find all those pieces of paper. And the gentleman said, I cannot find them. The wind's blown them all around. They're all over the place. He said, that is the point of when you make these kinds of statements. So today, I've decided, not today, but very, very, very recently, that I don't take these things lightly when members of the opposite side make suggestions, make innuendos, and make allegations. So I will intend to refute all of them as they come up. So, Mr. Speaker, in the case of the bananas, so we can put that, because, you know, we've said it many times, but again, I've realized with these members on the opposite side, Mr. Speaker, sometimes it takes more than many times. It takes a lot of times to repeat the same story, because they have a habit of just saying it over and over again.
Except, member for Microsoft, you are responding to something that is not on the record. Nobody made that allegation in a contribution.
Mr. Speaker, did they not just ask me to make an explanation?
But I didn't even hear that, because it's not on the record.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you did not hear, then I will choose again not to respond to it.
But
at the appropriate time, member from Free South, I'll be very happy to explain the situation with the bananas. But meanwhile, I think members on the opposite side have many more serious problems to deal with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance?
I really thought that this debate would end in that contentious manner. It's a simple thing. But Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition cannot help himself. No matter if he tries, he can't help himself. He just cannot help himself, Mr. Speaker. But I will not be tempted to go into bananas to France and that kind of thing, Mr. Speaker, because if I go in there, we'll have a long night. And I think that members want to go to their homes, Mr. Speaker, and then the leader of the opposition just cannot come to grips with the fact that the people of St. Lucia voted his party out of office. He just cannot understand. Mr. Speaker, we spent 5 years in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. We spent 5 years in this honorable house being taunted, being abused, being ridiculed. Our constituencies were starved. We sat there for 5 years and we took it, Mr. Speaker. They laughed at us. They laughed. No, Mr. Speaker, you know, and I didn't say so before, Mr. Speaker. Every time each member of parliament gets an allocation from the Minister of Finance, both members from Choiseul and Microsoft get theirs also. And I challenge him to tell me anytime hurricane, COVID, flood, that this government ever, CDP gave, CDP, yes, CDP.
So, Mr. Finance Minister, it's all nice and good, but
anytime.
Would you want to return to the bill before us, Minister?
Mr. Speaker, you see, I wasn't sleeping. But you know, this minister, he believes, he can't understand what happened to him. So he is Relax. Relax. Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, Julian Alfred, I remember, Mr. Speaker, Julian Alfred, the Minister for Sports, was taken to task. Money was paid to investigate national lotteries because he gave Julian Alfred $150 per month when he was going to school in Jamaica. He was taken to task. There was an investigation. Minister's account. You threaten him. You look for your friends to investigate him. You try your best. You try your best to send this man to jail. You try your best, Mr. Speaker. But we're not going to try. We're not going to try our best to do you that, Mr. Speaker. We're just going to speak the truth. Because you come and you speak about Julian Alfred. And when you were in a position to help Julian Alfred, you stopped the allowance for her. I remember several times, Mr. Speaker. You stopped it. You understand? You display this self-righteous attitude, Mr. Speaker. You know, stop it. 150 US. What he was using the minister's account for was to help poor people's children to play sports.
You go down there, they go and look at their house, promise them they get in a new house, and never did it. It's coming. It's coming. You will see which government will provide.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we try to come to this house, come to this house to debate and to make and to tell the people of St. Lucia a future. You insist in going off track to prove a point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you see, I'll tell you something. You always used to tell me about leadership of my party. Always used to taunt me. This can be behind you, that can be behind Mr. Speaker. Anytime there was any contest for leadership of my party, I went unopposed and I got most of all the votes. Your time is coming. I challenge you. Your leadership of your party is coming. Let's make sure you get all the votes, like me. Thank you, Mr.
Question is that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Land and House Tax Act Cap 15.13.
Clause 2.
I'm ready for the 5-year.
Amendment of Section 7.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the Land and House Tax Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Land and House Tax Amendment Act 2022.
Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Distribution and Price of Goods Amendment. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the bill is to amend the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 13.09. Mr. Speaker, on 14 January 2022, as Minister responsible for Commerce, I signed the Consumer Protection Act Commencement Order 2022, giving the Act a commencement date of 1st January 2022. Mr. Speaker, members may recall that it was only last year, September, that we passed amendments to the Consumer Protection Act number 9 of 2016, the said amendments being number 14 of 2021. Mr. Speaker, this was after 24 years of discussion spanning both administrations. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are back in this August chamber to take action to operationalize the Consumer Protection Act by amending a sister legislation, the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 1309. Mr. Speaker, why are we making this amendment? The Consumer Protection Act number 14 of 2021 made reference under Section 3 to the authorized officer in the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, given that the officers are authorized to enforce both pieces of legislation. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Commerce, through the Consumer Affairs Department, is mandated to monitor and enforce the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, the Consumer Protection Act number 9 of 2016, and its amendment number 14 of 2021. This task, Mr. Speaker, is the responsibility of the authorized officers within the Complaints and Investigation Unit of the Consumer Affairs Department. This unit comprises a Chief Complaints and Investigation Officer, Complaints and Investigation Officers, and Assistant Complaints and Investigation Officers. Mr. Speaker, the position of Chief Complaints and Investigation Officer is not captured in the definition of authorized officers in the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 1309. So, Mr. Speaker, and I think I have both pieces of legislation here. On the Consumer Protection Amendment Act, Section 2, and I quote, an authorized officer has the meaning assigned under the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 1309. And Mr. Speaker, under the interpretation section of the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, has that definition, Mr. Speaker, for authorized officer. And I read, an authorized officer means a price inspector and includes any person designated in writing by the minister to be an authorized officer, and any member of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force of the rank of sergeant. So, Mr. Speaker, today the amendment that is before this August body is to amend Section 2, Section 2 of the Act, and Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I will read that section now. Section 2 of the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 1309, is amended by A, deleting the definition of authorized officer, and by substituting the following. Authorized officer means A, the Chief Complaints and Investigation Officer, or B, a Complaints and Investigation Officer or Assistant. And B, inserting the following definition in the correct alphabetical sequence. And that is, Chief Complaints and Investigation Officer means a person appointed by the Public Service Commission to supervise the complaints and investigation officers and assistants and the investigation of consumer complaints. Mr. Speaker, I urge members to support this basic amendment to the Distribution and Price of Goods Act.
Honourable members, the question is that the Distribution and Price of Goods Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Distribution and Price of Goods Act, Cap 13.09.
Clause 2.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the Distribution and Price of Goods Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Distribution and Price of Goods Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Distribution and Price of Goods Amendment Act 2021.
Members, may I take this opportunity to remind ministers who made statements that those statements have to be made available to the Office of Parliament for distribution to all members. So as soon as you are able to, please let us have this. Let me, before I call on the Leader of Government Business, thank the members of the, let me thank the Attorney General's Office and the Leader of Government Business for the cooperation I continue to get from them to allow this House to meet and run its business as smoothly as it has. I want to thank the police officers, both within and outwith of the compound, the staff of the printry who on short order have been able to deliver to us the bills debated today, and of course the staff of the Office of the Parliament. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned, sign and die.
Honourable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned, sign and die. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
All right.
just at the adjournment of today's sitting of the House of Assembly, sign and die. We'll quickly give you a recap of the highlights of today's proceedings, and we'll start by the statement of ministers presented today, and there were two basically presented by the member for Castries Central, the Honorable Richard Frederick, and he's also the minister responsible for housing and local government, and his presentation mainly focused on the aspect of housing in St. Lucia and recent developments. And we also had the member for Beaufort North, Honorable Moses Jean-Baptiste, Minister for Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs, and he gave us an update on the COVID-19 situation in St. Lucia. Also back to statistics on the recent trends as far as the pandemic is concerned. And then we had a number of papers laid today by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy, and the member for Castries East. And papers were also laid by the Honorable Minister for Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information, Ernest Hilaire, member for Castries South. And we had the Honorable Minister for Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs, Moses Jean-Baptiste, their member for Beaufort North, also presenting papers here in Parliament today. The one and only motion presented was by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy, Philip J. Pierre, member for Castries East, that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports of personal items, food, clothing, toys, and other household consumables contained in barrels for the period commencing from the first day of February 2022 and terminating on the 31st day of March 2022. Well, we had a motion by the member for South, Ernest Hilaire, for an adjournment at about 1:50, and the House resumed at 2:45 for the afternoon session. And first of all, the first bill presented by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy, and that particular bill came in for considerable debate, and that was on the Public Finance Management Amendment. It went through committee stage of amendments, and we had a third time. We also had the suspension of the Standing Order 48-2 to allow a number of bills to go through the remaining stages, and these bills are also laid by the Honorable Prime Minister, that of International Business Companies Amendment, the Insurance Amendment, Financial Services Regulatory Authority Amendment, and Land and House Tax Amendment, which were all voted in the affirmative. And we had the final bill presented by the Honorable Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs, Emma Hiplet, and the member for SUFRA, and that came in for second reading and also went to committee stage. That actually brought the close of today's sitting of the lower house. So on behalf of all of us here from the National Television Network, the Government Information Service, I'm Ryan O'Brien saying goodbye from the House of Parliament.